Hello, podcast here on Full Press Radio Network. I'm your host, Jim Biringer. We'll go around the gridiron, around campus. I have a special guest with me today, Zig Fracassi, host anchor on Sirius XM NFL, Sirius XM Sports. Zig, welcome to the podcast.
Jim, good to be with you, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
I'm good. Anytime we're chatting college football or NFL, NHL, all's a good day, my friend.
It is a good day, absolutely. And we are here talking some college football, and we're through 7 weeks now. And man, I gotta say, probably the game of the year, at least game of the week last week, maybe game of the year until something else passes it by. Oregon, Washington in the Pac-12. What a game!
Oh my gosh, yeah, it was absolutely phenomenal. It was back and forth. Huskies got the early lead, then Oregon ultimately would make their run. Battle of two of the Heisman hopefuls, obviously, with Michael Penix Jr. and Bo Nix, who's really found a career there at Oregon after struggling a lot at Auburn. It's so ironic, Jim, that this is almost like the golden age of the Pac-12 in the final year of the conference, considering we're going to have all this mass migration, whether it's to the Big 12, whether it's to the Big 10 and everything like that. So I guess they're going out with a bang, but that game was just so up and down, came down literally to the final player plays. That's how you like it. That's how you know that it's a big-time game. Washington winning at home, and Coach DeBoer has really done a terrific job reviving what I thought was at one time kind of a stagnant program, especially after when Chris Peterson had a little bit of success with it. But really, gosh, since the time of the late 80s, early 90s, when Don James was the coach up there, that UW hasn't exactly been a national figure, but I think they are again under Coach DeBoer.
Yeah, I mean, the Huskies played such a great game. And Michael Penix Jr., if you didn't watch him at Indiana, man, he's coming in the national spotlight now here in Washington.
Absolutely.
I mean, he put a Heisman performance together. The front runner right now. I mean, it's early, but you could say he's the Heisman front runner. And Oregon on the other side. I mean, Dan Lanning owned it. He said we were too aggressive. Some play calls inside the red zone kind of cost them some points, field goal here and there. But you know what? I kind of like the aggressive play. But again, sometimes you want to take the points when you have a chance to.
Well, and that's a good point you bring up, Jim. I mean, I understand, analytics is a big part of what we do now, not only with college sports, but also pro and whatever sport that it really is. But sometimes you have to go with your gut. Sometimes you have to go with what logic tells you, or what, if you're worried about what X or Facebook or Instagram says about you, then maybe you should find something else to do. But if the head says go for three, the heart says go for three, take the points, whatever the case is. In fact, you could revert that to Sunday night NFL, how the Giants botched that first half ending against the Bills. You have got to take the three there. You've got to be aware of what's going on. Same thing happened last night with the Cowboys. I actually think McCarthy made the right decision going for three. But back to the college, and I appreciate Coach Lanning, like you said, owning it. But there are times, Jim, where it gets to be a little bit too aggressive. Take the points. You got to have a feel and a flow of how the game's going, and especially a game with that much importance to it. There's some instances I'm sure Coach Lanning would want to have it back.
Yeah, exactly, because it was only a 3-point game. I mean, 36-33,
Exactly.
come down. That's one field goal, especially I believe there was get to overtime, figure out what happens, because anything can happen in the college overtime. We know
Absolutely.
that. Interception, whatever. But, like, the big one that sticks to me is you're on the goal line, you get stopped. Like, and Oregon's defense was starting to hold Penix and that Washington offense in check a little bit, and they started to take over the game. And I think the aggressiveness, they tried to end the game. I understand it, but you let them back in and you gave them a lifeline, and Michael Penix Jr. took it, and Washington now sits first place in the Pac-12. I mean, I know USC's there because, they're still undefeated, but I expect their undefeated streak and their undefeatedness in the Pac-12 to come over real soon.
Yeah, and I think if anything, they got a blueprint of how to defend Caleb a little bit. And, we saw what happened in South Bend on Saturday night. Give Al Golden and Notre Dame a boatload of credit, forcing Caleb into 3 interceptions. Those get, turned over into points. And obviously Notre Dame put a nice little butt whooping on USC. And I think, quite frankly, Jim, they were due. I mean, the week before, Arizona should have beat them. You can even go back to the Colorado game. You allow 41 on the road. Even against Arizona State, USC wasn't all that impressive. So I think in the final analysis, I'd probably say in a very, very good conference, Washington's probably the best team right now in the Pac-12.
I agree with that. I think Washington is the best team in the Pac-12, and you said it before. What a renaissance! I mean, it's a shame that they're going out. This is the last year, because just imagine if leadership and they just let everything play out. I think the TV deal they could have gotten and keep this conference together, because there's so much good talent, so many good teams, and it's a shame because I didn't expect Arizona to put up another 44 points on Washington State.
Right?
That was very impressive.
Right. Yeah, and you'd have thought too, after the heartbreaking letdown of how that game ended. It went triple overtime on Saturday night, but geez, to be able to go up to the Palouse, and Washington State had been playing some really, really good ball themselves. But man, to put 44 up there and really just to do a hell of a job. Jed Fish is a guy that's kind of bounced around a little bit in the coaching ranks, but tell you, he's got something going on there at down in Tucson. So keep an eye on Arizona going forward. Their quarterback's not the biggest guy, but he seems to have a lot of spine, a lot of heart. He's got a good combination with the receiver there. I believe they both played together at high school in the LA areas. So Arizona could be a team to watch going forward.
I agree. I think Arizona's a great team. And again, we'll just go back to the final point on USC. I mean, you mentioned it. They're giving up points left and right. You go back to San Jose State, I believe they give up 27, give up 28 to Arizona State, 41 to Colorado, 41 to Arizona. That's not championship defense. And then they just got another 41 to Notre Dame. They have to clean this up if they expect to be in the Pac-12 championship game.
And let's give Lincoln Riley a credit for being an offensive, guru, whatever you want to call him. But if you notice, his teams at Oklahoma never played defense. This seems to be the same scenario going on at USC, and they actually have some people that are very, very good on defense. The safety immediately comes to mind, who I think's got a chance to be a pretty good player in the NFL, but they just don't have enough defensive playmakers. And maybe it's just the style. You get caught into these type of track meets. I guess it's one of those things is you compromise the defense because you've got such a A-list performer in Caleb, but you're not going to win championships like that. So at some point, I think Coach Riley's going to have to find a little bit of a balance between having that high-powered offense and having a defense that can at least make a few stops for you when the game is on the line.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Because of, we saw last year they get beat up twice by Utah. Even go back the year before that. I mean, their defense needs to step up, and they got a big game coming up. Utah's coming in, and they're no slouch either. Who knows if Cam Rising's going to be back, but Utah even looks good without him in the lineup. And like we said, this Pac-12 conference is so deep. Anybody can get there. We hope that we get a rematch of what we saw Saturday, but you can't count out the Utes because they are the 2-time Pac-12 champs.
Oh, not at all. And we talk about, I think, a criminally underrated coach is Kyle Whittingham. It seems like every year he has them in battle for not only the Pac-12 championship, but also in terms of being able to compete on a national level. I mean, let's face it, Jim. Salt Lake City, probably a great city in itself, but maybe not the easiest in terms of recruiting certain types of players or what have you. But the fact of the matter is, they're one of the teams that actually plays a good brand of defense. Coach Whittingham's defense, that's his background. I mean, before he became the head coach, he was Urban Meyer's defensive coordinator, so he has an idea of how good defenses play. They like to run the ball, obviously. You mentioned Rising. Unfortunately, that young man's been injured quite a bit too, but that's a team that really, to me, is a tough out for all of them simply because they are balanced on both sides of the ball.
And one more in the Pac-12 before we go back to Notre Dame. How about DJ Uyunglele's play at Oregon State? I think, you know,
Uh, yeah.
in Clemson, maybe underutilized, maybe the system wasn't as expected. Now he's got the Beavers in a nice position in the Pac-12, and they played really well. I believe they played UCLA at home, and he stepped up, and he stepped up his game really well. I'm liking the system that's been put in place in Oregon State for him.
Yeah, it's amazing what a change of scenery will do because just for whatever reason at Clemson, they did wind up ultimately replacing the offensive coordinator there. So I think maybe Dabo realized maybe DJ wasn't the problem. I mean, if you remember one of his early starts there, he threw for over 400 yards against Notre Dame in a game that they turned out to lose. But, sometimes a change of scenery is good. Oregon State obviously getting the best out of the young man. Seems like he's having a good time out there. And saw, what was it, earlier in the year, they had a nationally televised game. It was on CBS, and they just turned out to perform very well. So I think sometimes a change of scenery, fresh air, if you will. The transfer portal's been an absolute gem for some of these guys, as we've seen. So in the end, DJ maybe has sort of revamped some of his pro prospects, if you will.
Yes, he has. Notre Dame, big win for them. I know right now, kind of out of the playoff picture, but they needed that. And they were running a gauntlet of a schedule coming off that Ohio State game. I mean, that's a heartbreak to lose. Then you go down to Duke. What a game. Riley Leonard, you feel sorry for the kid. He gets hurt.
Absolutely.
But that was a heck of a game. And then the Louisville, that's just a tough gauntlet. And that's just a way to have a bounce back win against SC, big opponent, come in there and establish again. I think they get the running game going. Hartman still hasn't looked as good as he did in the beginning, but I think going up against SC's defense really helped.
Just a little synopsis there, Jim. I mean, you're going against a team, Ohio State. You played them tough the first game, the season before in Columbus, before Ohio State won that late. So, it's inexcusable, obviously, what happened. The 10 men on the field before the final touchdown. 2 plays so that was bad learning experience. The force the turnover you get against Duke, and then Hartman converts the 4th and 16, and then Estime blows the big opening for the touchdown. They get the win there. Louisville, I knew that was going to be a tough game. People tend to not remember that the year before, Louisville did a number on Sam Hartman when he was at Wake Forest. So they know the guy's tendencies. And obviously, this was a big game for them. And sure enough, Louisville beat them in the end, beat them rather handily. Although, how weird is that? The next week, they go to Pitt, and the Panthers put a nice little butt whooping on them. So it just goes to show, Jim, any given week, anything can happen. It probably had to be a letdown. And in this game, people were saying, well, geez, why is SC an underdog? They're unbeaten. They're a higher ranked team. But, these Vegas Sharpies know what they're doing. And early on, the turnovers started to really pile up. Notre Dame wasn't great offensively, but they capitalized on those turnovers. They get the kick return late. People tend to forget, this is still Marcus Freeman's learning period here. And so another signature win for them. If they could run the table, maybe they get a nice New Year's Day bowl game, but it's clear things are on the ascend at Notre Dame.
Yes, they are. Marcus Freeman, great coach. So glad he got the position when they came in. Thought they were going to pull it out his first game, too. And I think they were playing one of the big bowl games, and just a letdown. They lose. I believe they played Oklahoma State. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, that was the game. Gosh, Jack Cohn, who was the transfer from Northwestern, threw a robust 68 passes in that game.
That's high.
Yeah, it is. And they wound up blowing that game. And then, obviously they had the full year last year, and they had some tough losses. I mean, you can't lose to Stanford, you can't lose to Marshall. But again, I said this all along. This is like, you get your learner's permit, and then you get your license after getting the permit, and your first car is a Porsche. Normally you get the clunker, to beat that around a little bit if you bang it around. And then, if you're good, then maybe you upgrade cars, Jim. But geez, this is like giving him the Porsche and crashing it, not knowing the full, mechanisms of how to drive the damn thing. So it is what it is, but progress has been made. And obviously, some people still think Notre Dame's a top 10 team, even with those 2 losses. But, to each his own.
Yeah, I mean some people think they're an overrated team, but you know what? Viewership says people watch them, love them or hate them. People are going to tune in to watch Notre Dame,
They're a
right?
national team.
Absolutely, 100% national team, and they'll travel to any bowl game that they
Absolutely.
go to. I mean, I think I was out here when they played one year Pinstripe Bowl against Rutgers in Yankee Stadium. The crowd, the fans traveled for that game. I mean, not a great venue for a football game, but I mean, it was fun to see the atmosphere of the Notre Dame fans come out.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they've been, gosh, since, obviously since Rockney way back when, and then, being on national TV and, having their, that at the time, an exclusive deal with NBC and all that. They are like one of those like national programs, like a Bama is. You can make a case, maybe USC has a lot of prominent alumni all over the place. And it is what it is. Like I even tweeted out here on X, Notre Dame, I guess, had 4 million viewers or whatever the case was. I says they still draw the eyeballs because they're one of those teams. They're like the Cowboys in the NFL. You either love them or you hate them, and people who hate them want to see them fail spectacularly. So it is what it is,
Yeah,
right?
it definitely is what it is for sure. Oh, 100% with Notre Dame. You mentioned Bama. Too, were everybody writing off Nick Saban a little too early with Alabama? I mean, they still got some issues there offensively, but Jalen Milroe seems to be turning a corner, but they're still not looking like the Bama team we expect. But I think it was kind of expected that this might be a down year for them.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, it all comes to the quarterback. And they've had their run here the last few years, whether it was Mac Jones, whether it was Tua, whether it was Jalen Hurts. I mean, these guys ultimately became first round picks. And then when I raised a few eyebrows, it raised my eyebrows, I should say, when they're looking at Tyler Buckner, the former Notre Dame transfer, of course, played for Tommy Rees, who's now Saban's offensive coordinator at Alabama. I'm like, geez, is Nick that desperate for a quarterback? Because Milroe, he's got the talent, he's got the size, he's got the arm. But I've heard from people I know in watching from a pro perspective that he's a one read guy. In other words, he locks in on the one receiver and he doesn't check off to a second or third option, which is not going to get it done. And I mean, yeah, there's been instances this year, even this past week, that game came down to the final seconds. But I guess we're at this point now where if you don't win pretty, then all the games pass Saban by and this and that. Jim, they got one loss. They're still Bama. They're still Nick Saban. And let's face it. Do I think they're as talented as Georgia or some of these other teams? No, but still, you've got the coaching acumen of Saban. Although I think going forward now, you wonder with NIL and really how long Saban's going to stay down there at Tuscaloosa. Now they don't have such a monopoly on getting these 4 and 5 star recruits. I think NIL and all that's and the transfer portals really kind of changed the game, maybe because we got tired of seeing Georgia or Bama dominate every year. So now everything's a little more spread out, but still Bama's Bama, and they will be a force going forward.
Yeah, you mentioned it. It seems like every week with the pollsters anyway, the AP, this is the one year I've noticed where if you don't win pretty and you're one of those teams to expect to win every week, you're going to move down in the rankings. And Bama was one of
Absolutely.
those teams, and they have yet to move out of 11. Even though they're still winning, they're still not in the top 10. And kudos to those guys for, breaking down the games the right way because look, there have been years where like, maybe this guy should have moved up. Why did this team? Now we're seeing a little bit more consistency in the pollers.
Yeah, and it is again. Those rankings are what they are, and again, it's one of those things where Maybe because people have been so spoiled for so long that Bama was so dominant. But in the end, again, there's still a formidable team, of course, in a very, very good conference. Still think Georgia is the gold standard, although now I'd be curious to see how they go forward, especially without the star tight end Bowers. Looks like he's going to be out for a little bit here. But again, does Kirby Smart have enough guys in his tank here to maybe make a three-peat for a national championship?
It hasn't been done since those Minnesota Golden Gophers, and we're going back to the
Yeah,
1930s.
way back. Yeah.
Way back.
Yeah.
I brought that stat up to somebody, and they're like, "Where did you pull that one out?" I said, "Stat books," and it hasn't been
Nice.
done in a long time. But speaking of Georgia, have you been impressed with them this year? I mean, it's tough to three-peat, but I mean, Kirby Smart's still a great coach, and Carson Beck looks comfortable now. But it seems like some games they sleepwalk through. Some games they want to get up for. It's just tough to get up for every game in college football.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, their first couple of games, UT Martin and Ball State. I mean, it wasn't like they're playing the 30s Minnesota Golden Gophers by any stretch. The Auburn game, I thought maybe they kind of lollygagged a little bit. Vandy, gosh, they fell down 7-0 early in that game against the Commodores. But then, like I like to say, reality set in. So, I mean, to be 7-0 at this point, it's going to be really good. Of course, you think they'll be motivated this weekend or the following weekend, Jim. Of course, it's the world's largest outdoor cocktail party when they face Florida in a couple of weeks. Although the schedule gets a little bit tougher. Missouri's on the docket. Ole Miss at Tennessee. Those teams, Jim, those next three are in the top 25. And then you got their traditional rivalry with Georgia Tech. So I think Beck's been a little bit undervalued. A lot of people are saying, geez, he's not this great quarterback. But you know what? They continue to win. And these guys tend to rally around him. So Georgia, again, I think it's going to be very, very tough. But, man, that three-peat would be awfully nice.
And we haven't seen somebody go for it since USC, and they came up short, and that was a heck of a championship game if those remember it.
Best game ever I've seen. And I've been watching this stuff for about 50 years,
100%. One of the best games I've ever watched. Witness, Vince Young, Texas team, and, big weekend this weekend. The Big Ten East, it always comes down to three teams, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. We're going to get the first of the matchups this week, Penn State and Ohio State. Ohio State hasn't looked great. They're starting to turn it around a little bit. Michigan seems to be the best team, but can they deliver when it matters if they get to the playoff?
Penn State, Ohio State, this has got to be the time where, James Franklin has done a really good job under the circumstances. Obviously, he came after O'Brien after, what happened there, the horrific thing with Sandusky and Paterno at Penn State. And they've really kept this program near where they used to be. But you've got to have a signature win at some point. This has to be the time, if you will, for Penn State to really say, all right, we're back among the big boys. We've been kind of flirting on the outside of it, but to beat Ohio State in Columbus, national TV, that would be the statement game. And Michigan, they look awfully good. The McCarthy, the quarterback there, Harbaugh just absolutely loves him. I saw something on the internet basically saying that he thinks that he's one of the all-time greats now. And that's even, a compliment because Jim Harbaugh was a pretty good quarterback in his day at Michigan. And, let's not forget either, Michigan, they're this program that had been dormant for a while, kind of irrelevant. Harbaugh, I think, got them on the verge, but they're another team, Jim, like I just said with Penn State. You got to have that signature win. It's really good to make the national playoff. But now, to get in there and to have that signature win, I think both Michigan and Penn State going forward are on watch. Like, it's nice, but now you got to be able to do it.
Do you think and it's hypothetical game, but you never know.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think if Michigan falls short and doesn't win a national championship this year, do you think Harbaugh goes to the NFL and coaches again there?
That's a really good question. I don't know if he'd want it. I mean, he was there, obviously, ascended San Francisco to the championship game, almost pulled off that great rally against his brother John in the Super Bowl against the Ravens down in New Orleans. And maybe the lights don't go out this time. But as I digress, that was still the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. But
Me too.
I don't know. I think he's there at Michigan for the long term. I mean, if you even looked at Jim Harbaugh when he got back to Michigan to now, and if you have visuals of the iconic Bo Schembechler, Harbaugh has morphed in the Bo with the Michigan hat, the glasses, even a little bit of weight increase over the last few years. Every time I look at Harbaugh on the sidelines, I see Bo Schembechler, for goodness sake. So I think Jim Harbaugh's in this for the term, unless something just overwhelms him to get back to the NFL. He's got it made in Ann Arbor, so I don't see that happening.
Yeah, I just want to make sure because I hear his name always like just thrown around. Oh, Harbaugh's going to go back. I'm like,
Oh, of course.
I mean,
Of
look,
course.
these guys could make it a career in college coaching and just stay there because you could be like we saw with Paterno and then everything happened with that. But you stay there, Bobby Bowden down in Florida State.
Saban went back,
Saban,
you know?
yeah, and he's turned another program into a powerhouse.
Yep.
And they're still alive, and let's see what they do. And then in the Big 12, I mean, again, we talk about final years. How about Texas and Oklahoma in their final year in the Big 12? It's like a resurgence there for so many years. Those teams, Oklahoma was there, but it seemed like somebody else would come along. Seems like they're owning that conference again.
How about that game they played a couple weeks ago with the Red River rivalry down in Dallas, and just coming down to the end, Dylan Gabriel, besting the quarterback there at Texas, and that was just a really, really good ball game. And now both those teams, Jim, going in to the SEC, which is a ridiculously strong league to begin with. Now you add that cachet, but I'm really looking forward to when Arizona and some of these other programs wind up going into the Big 12. Sneaky good league. Iowa State's right there in terms of the conference leaders. Gundy seems like he's got Oklahoma State playing some decent ball. Kansas, one of my favorite coaches, Leipold. He built up Wisconsin Whitewater. He had the University of Buffalo playing some relevant football. Now it seems as though he's doing his work again at a predominantly basketball school. And it's been a little bit of a rough transition for like a BYU, Houston, Cincinnati. It's been a little bit of a rough transition, but I think once they start getting their footing, if you will, I think the Big 12 is going to be a very strong football league, even with Oklahoma and Texas leaving.
I agree. I think the Big 12 is going to be a conference to watch. They still got a great TV deal as well. And, that's what one of the big things like ACC teams have been talking about is their TV deal. And they're bringing teams in, and the cross-country travel is going to be crazy for all these leagues. But North Carolina's got their defense back together again. I mean, last year their defense was not great. It was like USC is like, oh boy, what can they do? But you got Drake May and that Tar Heel defense. Man, if they can get to the title game, maybe beat a Florida State, they may be in the Final Four at the end of this thing. I mean, still a long ways to go, but I'm liking what the Tar Heels are doing in the ACC right now.
Yeah, so that so-called basketball league, they can play a little bit of football. It's really. I went to the Clemson Duke game, the opening game of the year, because my good friend and SiriusXM colleague Dusty Dvorak, the former Oklahoma great, also does games for ESPN and ABC, and even Duke is impressive in football. You mentioned North Carolina. I mean, they're allowing just 21 points per game. That's a dramatic turnaround. Let's not forget Gene Chizik, who was the former head coach at Auburn. Before then, defensive whiz, and now it looks as though he's been able to get the Tar Heels turned around. Of course, Florida State with Coach Norvell, they have gotten things in there. Louisville, even though they got trounced by Pitt, good win against Notre Dame for them. So very strong league. I think Clemson's in a bit of transition. Miami, just a brutal loss a couple weeks ago to Georgia Tech. That was inexcusable. And then last week actually played North Carolina tough before reality set in. So some good ball in the ACC. And again, North Carolina, one of my favorite coaches is Mac Brown. And, you talk about going back. He had a nice run in the late 90s. They were producing the Julius Peppers, the Greg Ellis's, guys like that coming out of that program. Looks like the second time go around there at North Carolina has treated Coach Brown very well.
Yeah, I mean, they had a tough game. He even said it, I believe, after their last game against Appalachian State. Thank God we don't play these guys anymore because Appalachian State just gives them a run for their money every time.
Oh, yeah. And we saw this number of years ago. What was it? Labor Day weekend. I remember an old friend of mine, Scotty Wetzel, and I were doing a show on Mad Dog Sports Radio. And I kept telling him, I says, they're gonna hang with Michigan, if not beat them outright. He's like, you're out of your mind. The Wolverines are gonna win by 50, yada da da. And then boom, what happened? Appalachian State pulled the stunning upset. And I told him, I wish we were still on the air that weekend because I would have roasted your ass pretty good telling you about Appalachian State. But yeah, they're just another of those programs. But as well as I do, Jim, anytime, any given, any more every day of the week.
Yeah, right.
We're in like a stretch now. I think it's like 50 straight days of football. It's unbelievable. But just back to your point, any given time, games can be tough. It's the focus. You think, well, let's just roll the ball out, and because Appalachian State's not us, we got all the big names. Things like that could lead you to an upset. But again, the good teams are the ones that prevail in the end.
Staying in the ACC, you said you were there at Duke, Clemson. Talk about the job Mike Elko's done with that Duke program. I mean, 9 wins last year. I believe they're having another good season this year, up to 5 wins, I believe now. No Riley Leonard. Just talk about that team and what he's done.
Well, I think you got to give a little credit to Coach Cutcliffe, too, because David Cutcliffe was the one who really kind of got things getting back on the ball there, because Duke had been forever, as we know, a basketball program. And it really hadn't been since Spurrier was there in the late 80s. In fact, I think it was the last time Clemson or Duke had beaten a top 10 team, like in the regular season. And it just so happened to be Coach Spurrier and that 89 team was on hand that night. So that was very, very inspirational. And, you look at Duke, I mean, my gosh, 5-1 on the season. They gave a lot of not even 59 points is it in 6 games. So it's been very, very good for them. Yep. I need my old man glasses, but yeah, 59 points allowed, which to me says they're doing quite well. Elko, of course, and I'm biased because I'm a Notre Dame guy, but he was on that staff a few years ago and people loved him, and they tend to play well for the 1999 grad of Penn. And then you've got Riley Leonard, who to me, I'm not sure he's a third-day draft pick in the NFL. He might be one of those guys you get as an undrafted free agent. But in the final analysis, I think Duke has done a terrific job. They've definitely bought in with the program there with Coach Elko and the job that he's done. Waters is a pretty solid back. And, on defense, they've got guys like Freeman and Stinson, Jim, that I think may draw some pro considerations. So it's really a steady job that Coach Elko has done down there at Durham, North Carolina.
And they got a big matchup this weekend when they go to Florida State. That's going to be a telltale sign.
Absolutely.
It's a big test for them and the Blue Devils. I mean, it's a big test for Florida State, too, because they at times have looked good, but at times have not looked so good. I mean, you go back to the Boston College game, you're routing the team, and you let them come back. That's not top 10 material. That's not winning material either. But again, it's hard to get up for every game. It's hard to finish every game. But, this is going to be a big test for both teams.
Well, let's not forget, I mean, that Florida State game, yeah, like you mentioned, Boston College, I mean, they were chasing that game from quite the beginning. I mean, it was amazing that they were able to pull that one out there in Chestnut Hill. But then the last couple of weeks, pretty solid win against Virginia Tech. Last week, they just did a real number on Syracuse, who, unfortunately, it seems like every year they start strong under Coach Babers, but now they're starting to fade. And then, again, Travis, I think, is a really good leader for this program. You need to have that. And just looking at the rest of their schedule here, Jim, there's no reason Coach Norvell's team can't go unbeaten. You got Wake Forest coming up after that, Pitt, Miami, North Alabama. Wow, North Alabama this late in the year, my gosh. And then you've got. I mean, some of these matchups, like even like you understand that late, earlier in the year, but maybe that was because they played LSU in the season opener. So I guess that kind of trades each other out. And then you close out with Florida. No reason for Florida State not to be able to run the table and play in the ACC championship. And who knows, maybe get a spot in the national playoff.
Yeah, that would be unbelievable. I mean, who would have thought about get Florida State back in there? And because everybody's like, oh, they're back, they're back. Well, they haven't been back yet. Maybe this is the year they get back.
They're
Texas,
getting close to being back.
exact. And I tell everybody down, my friends, big time Miami guys, they're like, yeah, we're finally back. I'm like, you guys will find a way to blow it. You're not back yet. You're not back yet.
Yeah.
And I'm texting them after the debacle against Georgia Tech. I'm like, they got to take a knee here. I mean, that was, you go into North Carolina, if you're undefeated, okay.
Absolutely.
Then you lose, okay, that's fine. But you can't lose that game. I mean, Georgia Tech always plays them tough, but still, you cannot lose that game the way they did. I mean, that's just a bad coaching error.
Yeah, well, sometimes like we talked about a little bit earlier, being a little bit too aggressive or maybe just overthinking things or, something gets lost in the translation, whatever the case may be. Jim, you just got to stick sometimes with your gut, stick with the instinct, stick with what you probably have learned, go for the field goal or punt here. We've got to make them whatever the situation might be. If we punt, then we drive them deep in their own territory. They got to burn their timeouts. Whatever the game situation is, go with your original instinct and not what social media or the analytics might tell you.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, this part, numbers don't lie. I was looking at it. I mean, it's not going to matter now, but if Louisville had remained undefeated in the ACC, there could have been a three-way tie for the top, and none of those teams play each other. That would have been very interesting to see.
Yeah, then you got to go. What do you got to go by? Strength of schedule, or all the numbers that you laid out. And gosh, that was when the old, well, it's old now, but like the BCS, if you remember that.
I do remember that.
Yeah, the computer ratings and all that kind of thing. I'm like, really, we're gonna have a blanket computer decide this team over this one because the numbers look for their favor. Again, it is what it is, but now. Obviously, was last year of the 14 playoff before we get to the 12, and before long it may be 24. But I digress. But
yeah, I know. Well, you mentioned the playoff. I mean, I just would like your thoughts on it. I know I've talked to some other people who's like, yeah, I'm not a big fan of it, But again, it's better than what we had with the BCS. Do you think it gets past 12 to maybe just we stop it at 16, or could it go even further? Because I don't think more than 16 is the right number.
Well, gosh, I'm old enough to remember, Jim, when there was no playoff. It was based on the AP and the late great UPI at the time. That was how you evaluated things. It was that's when the rankings really meant something. But then it was determined that wasn't enough. So everybody hemmed and hawed about a system. But then you wind up getting a system which is supposed to make things more equitable. Well, geez, why are we letting a computer decide things and all this? So, again, it's better than what was originally had. 12, I'm not a terrible opponent to. I'm with you. I think if it ever got past 16, then I'm like, well, geez, why don't we just do this like the basketball and have like this wickedly bad tournament? So you can't do it like that, like you would in college basketball. I would think 16 would probably be the limit. And if anything, it would benefit those particular bowls, I would think. So, like if you got the Pop-Tarts Bowl, maybe that actually means something in terms of the playoff as opposed to, just showing up and having 5 and 6, 6 and 5 type teams play. So I think 12 is going to be good. 16 might be my limit. So I'm with you there.
Yeah, me too. I think it's just too much. And like, I got a feeling, even if we're at 12, you see some of these home teams that get these buys. I think they're going to want those home games on their campus. Eventually, we're probably going to have that if we go to 16 because after the first year, oh, well, they got all this revenue. How come we didn't get it? Like the big schools, like the Alabamas or the Georgias, be like, hey, I want that revenue too.
Right. Well, I don't know. I don't know if it would ever get to the home field
Yeah.
as maybe it would just be a bowl game, like I just mentioned here, where maybe in years past, like a holiday bowl, maybe it
Yeah.
wouldn't
Yeah.
have it would have two decent teams, but this time it would be tied in to the playoff. And I don't know if they would do that geographically or not. Again, that's something that the NCAA's got to figure out.
Yes, they do. Before we wrap up, I want to get your thoughts on what Deion Sanders has done at Colorado. Obviously, big time loss against Stanford, that up 29-0.
Yeah.
That's not really a good loss at all. Especially when you're on the verge of potentially getting within one win of bowl eligibility. Though 6 wins, I've noticed, doesn't really matter because they still take 5 and 7 teams to these bowl games.
Yeah, they do.
Me personally, I would love to see 7-5. That's the max. That's the minimum that you need to get to a bowl. But hey, I digress. But what are your thoughts of Deion and what he's done for Colorado and college football overall?
Well, I'll tell you what, Jim, you got the predominant color of green going there in Boulder. I mean, this has been a program that, quite honestly, in some spots when Rick Neuheisel was there and some of the other years, there were some competitive teams, but I think this is a program that basically has been lying in the weeds for many, many years. And yeah, they probably took a chance on this. They knew, Dion was a salesman and all this and that, but also he's got the record at Jackson State to show that he got things turned around there. He created a buzz at a predominantly HBCU school that brought them attention, that brought them some money for the coffers of the program. And sure enough, they did get off to that really good start. And I honestly believe if Travis Hunter doesn't get hurt, I think maybe Colorado wins another game or two. So the fact that he has awakened a dormant program, the fact that he's been able to bring attention and money to said program, if I even saw Terry Fry, the great former writer up there in Denver Post, would say that if you thought at this point, if you had Colorado at 4-3, knowing their past history and everything like that, you wouldn't take that record right now? Absolutely, you would. So it's clear he's got that program on the rise. They've been, even in their loss, like the SC game, I thought they were competitive. He knew that the game against Stanford, though, he even had a bad feeling. He says, up 29-0. I just didn't feel confident about this game. But long answer to your question, he's created a buzz. He's created attention. Now guys may want to go to Boulder where they probably said, nah, it's too cold up there. Maybe the societal situation, let's call it, isn't great for, players of minority standing, although I think it's gotten a lot better
Mm-hmm.
in the last 20 to 25 years. So there's a buzz, there's an interest, and I think Deion's there for a little bit. So it's clear he's done a terrific job, and just the cachet of playing for arguably the greatest defensive back to ever play in the
Oh,
NFL and all what he's brought. There's a lot of substance underneath what we saw through the years of style with Deion. So it's clear Colorado's trending in the right direction.
do you think because Dave Starman, he does World Junior coverage on the
Oh,
NHL
that's my
Network.
guy. He's the
Yeah,
best.
he
I love
he
Starman.
always talks about it when USA loses or team loses, coaches reestablishing the room. Do you feel like this Stanford loss allows Deion to reestablish the room because maybe the hype, players were believing and reading the hype too much?
I think so. He's been in enough locker rooms throughout the years. He's seen his team slump and then realizes, you know what, maybe I got to get things back together. We talked about that example a little bit earlier. Just, well, we're Colorado. Stanford's no good. We'll just roll the ball out and our talent will, supersede things. So I think it's one of those things. It's definitely a learning experience. If anybody thought Colorado was going to be a national contender this year, you're sadly mistaken. I mean, he redid this entire roster, and there's going to be peaks and valleys. So I'm with you there, Jim. I think he uses this as a teaching point. Like, all right, we suffered this loss, but now let's refocus, try to get ourselves a decent bowl game, and then move on from there.
Yeah, absolutely, Zig. I agree with you 100% on that. And look, even if they only end up with 5 or 6 wins, that's a very successful season in Colorado,
Sure.
considering they only had one win the last several years in that Pac-12.
Yeah, and again, this is a program that's been I think from a steady competitive standpoint, dormant since the late '80s, early '90s when Bill McCartney was running that program. When you had the likes of Eric Bieniemy coming through there and Deion Figures. In fact, I went back and watched that the other day. That ESPN 30 for 30 about that program and how basically they had to rebuild that program to compete with Nebraska and Oklahoma. In some ways, it's almost what Deion's having to do now. It's just we're talking about 2023 instead of 1983.
Wow, that's going back a ways with that program, and I think they haven't been this relevant since the 1990s. I was reading,
Right.
so I mean, he's doing a heck of a job. Regardless, again, whether you think they're overrated, underrated, doesn't matter. He's brought attention to that program, and he's made them. Hey, they're on national TV. People want to tune in, and he's doing a great job. And again, it's only year one, and then they'll move to the Big 12, and there's going to be a lot of good football there, as we mentioned earlier.
Although Jim, the road, I think they got a bye this week, but then they got UCLA, Oregon
Ooh.
State. Yeah, this gets really tough. UCLA, Oregon State, Arizona, Washington State, and then Utah.
Oh.
So if they could get 2 more wins at least out of that, then he's really doing a hell of a job there in Boulder.
Oh, absolutely. That's a gauntlet of a schedule. I mean, it's compared to a lot of other teams around the college football, we see some of these schedules. But like you said, and we said it all along, you don't know any given day, any given Saturday. Hey, it was Friday 13th weekend. Maybe that's why we saw so many crazy games. I don't know. But Zig, this has been a pleasure talking college football with you here on the Full Press College Football Podcast.
Jim, yeah, I always love the interactions that we have on X at Zig Sports Voice. Of course, you do a terrific job also covering the Devils and the National Hockey League, and which is my passion, of course, the NHL, and then obviously pro football talk. But yeah, chat college football. This has been a pleasure, my man.
Absolutely. I'd love to get you on the hockey podcast as well. We talk Bruins. We go around the league as well. That would be absolutely fun. Absolutely. That's great. Guys, this has been Around the Gridiron, Around Campus, the College Football Full Press Podcast. Get it? iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. It'll be up on the Full Press Radio Network as well, also on YouTube. Guys, enjoy college football this weekend. Zig, thank you so much. And this has been Zig Fracassi, Sirius XM NFL, and Sirius XM Sports. Check it out again. iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Take care, everybody.